And good evening and welcome to Red, White, and True as we embark on episode number 2 with you, as always, our faithful Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, Eric Eager from Pro Football Focus. My name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810 WHB. And guys, a lot to get to today. The first preseason game has happened. And I guess, if this were an NFL game and the Kansas City Chiefs had held the San Francisco 49ers to 16 points, we would be looking at this and saying, man, what a great defense. Is there any reason, Eric? I know you're passionate on this one. Is this a great defense? Is it a good defense? Is it a good enough defense, or does it still have work to do? Where would you put it?
I think actually our average expectation for the Chiefs this year should be that they're a good defense. I don't think we've held for dear life the last half a decade and said, look, this defense just needs to be good enough. And 17 they weren't, 18 they weren't, 19 they were, last year they were too. And I think that the way things are shaping out now, we could talk about, what happened today with Frank Clark and so on and so forth. But I think right now the floor for the Chiefs should be good enough defense. And the expectation should be good defense. And if we run good this season, we should have a great defense, a defense that they can win with or win because of, even though they never had to.
Quick and I think, do you, Jeff, do you appreciate the fact that Eric's part of the squad, that he's in the We Club?
The We Club? What do you mean, the We Club?
We have a good enough defense that
I didn't hear that part. Yeah.
It's after 10 o'clock Eastern. I'm allowed to. I'm not professional anymore at this point.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad our endeavor brings you to the highest level, Eric. I'm sorry, I rudely interrupted you. Just go ahead. Continue, please.
Yeah, I mean, look, this team actually has legitimate depth, I think, at almost every position for the first time in a long time, right? You look at that cornerback position, right now they're starting Snead, who's a pretty good player, Ward, who's a pretty good player, and then there's question marks, but there's 3 or 4 guys that I think have question marks, but they're not question marks about whether or not this guy can go from being terrible to being okay. It's question marks as to whether this guy can go from being serviceable to good, right? Like Mike Hughes, the player that's played extremely well this preseason or the training camp from the people I listened to. And DeAndre Baker, who wasn't quite as impressive during practice the other day against San Francisco, they were 0 for 6 throwing into his coverage. He had 2 pass breakups. You have Rashad Fenton, who played a key role in both Super Bowls that they've made the last 2 years. So at the position for which it is the most important to be deep, they are deep. They're also at safety. We're going to talk about Juan Thornhill, but he's the third safety, which means, again, there's a second safety that's good enough to play over him. Even though he's a little disappointing for us, I think anybody in the league would take him as a third safety. The defensive line, you have 4 really good interior defensive players, if you count Chris Jones, because you have Treshaun Wharton, you have Derek Nottie, you have Jerron Reed. Edge is going to be an issue. And then linebacker, I think, maybe being a little charitable here, but I do think that they have enough depth there to be good enough in Spagnuolo's defense. You add that all up and you add in the Honey Badger as a big playmaker, and this can be a defense that they win because of.
Jeff?
I see where Eric's going with this, and I am encouraged by what I've seen. I've been one of the bigger critics of their defense over the last few years, especially at cornerback. So I've always felt like they've got to try to get by with bargain basement players in that position, and it is encouraging to see. I think they didn't get lucky with L'Jarius Sneed because they obviously drafted him, but I think the way he's progressed, what he's turned into, has given them a lot more stability and optimism about that secondary. I think it's funny, Eric kind of glossed over the edge part of it. That's the part that concerns me.
Yeah.
It's that, so much of what Steve Spagnuolo does isn't just with interior linemen, it's with edge rushers. And when he's had those kind of guys, you go back to the Giants days with Strahan and OCU Manure and Justin Tuck being able to move outside. He had really good he had championship caliber defenses. When he's with the Saints, he didn't have those kind of defenses, and they were awful. But I do believe that the moves that they've made over the last few years are starting to pay off. I think that they are putting more stock in the importance of defense. I think when Andy first got Mahomes, it was all like, we're just going to outscore people. Who cares what we do over there? And now they've come back to their senses. I often tell people that the most underrated part of their loss in the Super Bowl is that they gave up 31 points too. It wasn't just the offensive line sucked. It was that they couldn't pressure Tom Brady, and he had his way with them. And so I do see a lot of hopefulness. I see more athleticism at linebacker. I see more depth at corner. Again, edge rusher is a question mark, but there's a lot more to be excited about than in previous years at this point in time.
Which game are you saying they gave up 31 points?
The Super Bowl.
It's 31-20.
No, last February.
I thought you were talking about the Super Bowl they won. I thought you were saying the Super Bowl.
No, the one they lost.
Yeah, the one they lost. Yes, they did. Okay, my bad. We were talking about, because I was thinking about when Eric was saying, hey, they were good enough in 19.
Okay.
Because in my mind, that's where I was going to double back to. And were they good enough in 19? Really? I mean, I know they gave up 20 to the 49ers, but since then we've decided, well, the 49ers looked really good, but on that day, and there was a little bit of shooting themselves in the foot. We know, I think it's been unfair. A big thing that was talked about, in that Chiefs preseason game was that, well, if Trey Lance plays in that Super Bowl, the 49ers win, which we'll get to Trey Lance on Thursday night. Maybe there's a little bit of embellishment going on there, but the idea that, if Jimmy Garoppolo hits Emmanuel Stewart, they win that game. Right. Never mind that there was still, over 2 minutes. Chiefs had 3 timeouts and we're going to be trailing by 3. But there's this feeling that if that connection happens, the 49ers cruise. And while I don't subscribe to that, because you got to make the play, right? If my, if my aunt had stones, she'd be my uncle, right? She doesn't, and she's not. So that always bothers me on that kind of thing. But so I bristle, and I'm sure I bristle more when it's my team. But I do think there is an element of, that they were down 10 because they had given up 20 points, really in about 3 quarters. The 49ers, got the ball and didn't do much with it in the first part of the fourth quarter. But I think there is an element of the defense, ran into, like, it was Jimmy Garoppolo in the Super Bowl. And listen, Tom Brady's victories are going up against Jared Goff, and they're going up against, lesser quarterbacks. That's how you do it. You go into the Super Bowl and you have the better quarterback. That's the best recipe to win it, right? The Trent Dilfers and the Brad Johnsons are the exceptions. But generally speaking, hey, we thought Kurt Warner sacked groceries. Turns out he's the Hall of Famer, and Steve McNair is just pretty good. The better quarterback wins it. So I'm not trying to tear down what the Chiefs did, but I do think that game was closer than people realize, and I'm just asking how much that was the defensive side, giving a Jimmy Garoppolo somewhat one-dimensional team that missed on some big plays 20 points, and not being able to take it away until the very end. In the last 7 minutes, and all 60 minutes count, then they started making them look like what you think Jimmy Garoppolo is. That's my point, Jeff. That's where I was getting confused between the 19.
Yeah.
It was the 19 defense all that good? Should we just be talking about getting back to a 19 level, or was it a little bit of a mirage with its points allowed?
Well, the 19 defense got hot. And I think you need to have that when you go on championship runs too. Your defense has to run hot. Those defenses that Spagnuolo had in New York, you look at their overall numbers, and they weren't exceptional, but they got hot at the right time. And so that's what I saw in 2019 was you look at from, I think it was week 10, week 11 on, after Ryan Tannehill went off against them and then that Titans win, they were pretty much able to get the job done. They weren't playing against the best quarterbacks at that point, like the Derek Carrs and Phillip Rivers past his prime. And, there wasn't a top elite level quarterback in that run they had, aside from Deshaun Watson. But yeah, you play who gets put in front of you. And I think they did that, but I think what you're talking about with that game in 2019, the Super Bowl, what you saw the Niners have was, an okay quarterback without many weapons. I know you meant Emmanuel Sanders, not Emmanuel Stewart, the boxing trainer, when you talked about that.
I'm not good with names.
They didn't have the weapons on the outside to take advantage of the Chiefs' flaws. The Bucs did. It's different when you have Mike Evans out there, and Chris Godwin, and Gronkowski, and Tom Brady throwing the football.
But the Chiefs, this is by design, though, because Kansas City going into the game last year, only one team in the entire NFL had surrendered fewer passing yards to wide receivers than Kansas City, and that was out the LA Rams. So to me, I think it's almost by design, right? Like they do a good job. They do slough off at corner from an investment perspective, but they do a great job, I think, of hiding it or funneling plays inside. And there might be a situation where if they And that's maybe why. And they got rid of Marcus Peters before they got Spagnuolo, but it would probably be one of those things where if they ever got a corner who is sort of a freelance player, they would struggle more because it really does buy into the process. And you look at even the Super Bowl in this February where they lost and gave up 31 points, like, if you bet under on Mike Evans, you won. If you bet under on Chris Godwin, I almost said Chris Godwin, you won. And, Antonio Brown had some run, but the tight ends is what really killed Kansas City. And that is, I think, by design. It's why they were so good against Buffalo, who has great wide receivers. It was why they were good against Cleveland, who has, probably better wide receivers than they do tight ends. And I think that's that's why they struggled mightily in both games defensively against the Raiders, because they're making a good gamble. There's only like 3 elite tight ends in all football, and they have one of them. So like that defense is going to be a pretty good one in most games. And, that's again why Thornhill is so important. That's why Willie Gay's athleticism is so important. And if those things land for the Chiefs, they might even take that weakness and make it a strength. And that again is like, I agree with you. Like, I don't think the last 2 years they've been brilliant. I don't think that if Mahomes has a crappy day, they can beat a good team. I'm hopeful that this season, if Mahomes doesn't have a great game, they can beat a good team. I'm not saying beat Atlanta 17-14. I'm saying like beat a good team when your quarterback stinks. And in the Super Bowl in 2019, they kind of did that, right? Because they held Garoppolo and company to 20 points, but Mahomes came on at the end. I'm talking about like in a game where you had to win 17-13. That's the one thing the Chiefs haven't been capable of in the Mahomes era, and I wonder if this defense is the one that can get them there.
Yeah.
Do you mentioned the tight ends? Like, has that been improved? Like, are you confident that Willie Gay, Bolton, the safety play is at a level that they can handle that, or is the same game plan that beat them in the Super Bowl going to beat them this year?
I don't know. I think having Willie Gay out there is a good thing, right? I think one of the things that I noticed, again, going back to the 19 Super Bowl when we were in Miami, and the whole week I'm just like, I'm scared as hell of these fast running backs and tight ends against Anthony Hitchens and Damian Wilson. And like the most impressive thing about Steve Spagnuolo that entire season was I was at the Super Bowl and I did not think about the Chiefs linebackers one time, right? I did not. Like, he hid them. And obviously that comes at a cost, right? It comes at Mathieu having to do 17 things. And it comes at, if they don't have to hide them, right? If they can use a linebacker as an asset as opposed to hiding that player, I think that they can rectify that, the tight end issue.
All right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Right. No, go ahead, Jeff.
No, I was just going to say that the point that Eric just made a second ago is valid, that Spagnuolo does a great job of playing to his strengths and controlling his weaknesses. And the one thing you've been able to do to the Chiefs defense in the past, in the last few years, is if you can match them up, if you can put them in individual matchups, you can take advantage of it. Even a guy like Mathieu, he can't handle Darren Waller on his own or Rob Gronkowski on his own. They're just too big and they're too fast. Charvarius Ward can be solid in coverage, but if you put him on an island with Chris Godwin or Mike Evans, he's going to start reaching and grabbing. And so to have more athletic players, to have those chess pieces, I do think that gives them a lot more flexibility, a lot more hopefulness of being able to do more things with their people as opposed to hiding them.
How much is, the overall depth? Like, Eric, you've talked about the fact that, winning a defense isn't about having one or two guys that are really difference makers. It's about having no weak links. Have they eliminated the weak links? Is Gay the last weak link for this defense? Or as Eric, or as Jeff says, is Ward still a link? We in Kansas City, people look at it, Chiefs fans look at it, they see his best games and they just poo-poo away his bad games. Is there a weak link on this defense to be attacked? Because Jeff would probably say, hey, the edge, like if you give him all day, everybody's coverage starts to look rough. And with Frank Clark limping off the practice field on Tuesday, we think the returns will be good on Chris Jones, but he's playing a new position. Josh Kando, by my estimation, the rookie 4th-round pick, is a magnet for the chest of an offensive tackle. We see big numbers out of Tim Ward against 3rd, 4th stringers. couple of sacks in the game. Tershawn Wharton is active but undersized. Do they have the depth, on the edge and across the defensive line to consistently put pressure? Because the big play by Trey Lance, was a jet chip wasp like route. I mean, it was a double move 20 plus yards down the field. That took all day to develop. Somebody up front could have gladly gotten to the defensive line before, the DB got turned around.
Yeah. Kando had 3 pressures in 29
I would like the PFF grader needs to step forward and let's discuss. 3 pressures.
He had 3 pressures and 29 pass rushes, which is not a good rate. You need to be, 1 in 10 is not good, right? You need to be 12%, 15%. You can't be 10%, especially against backup tackles. I'll say this, and again, I have red and gold colored glasses on this time of year every single year. There's a difference in football between being attacked in attacked positions and being weaker in positions that attack, if that makes sense. So pass rushing is very much a strong link system. If you have one dominant pass rusher, you can sort of get by because you can choose where to put that guy matchup wise. Coverage is a weak link system, meaning that it goes as good as your worst player, right? So if that player's Ben Neiman or that player's, Rashad Fenton, or back in the day, if it was Orlando Scandrick and Reggie Ragland, right? Like the team that you're facing can attack that weak player, right? And to some degree, the reason the Chiefs lost the 2018 AFC Championship game was not because they didn't have a great pass rush. Houston, Ford, they were great that year. Chris Jones, it was they couldn't cover a $5 check. So Tom Brady would go 1, 2, 3, bang, 1, 2, 3, bang, 1, 2, 3, bang. And so I'd rather be strong in the weak link systems and figure out a way to generate pressure in the strong link systems. Again, I'd rather have Frank Clark be good, but that's not a reality we live in. I do think this is a weak thing. I do think of the weak things, they have the better chance of overcoming it when it is the edge player, rather than if it's like I'm missing 2-3 players in the secondary that are any good.
We talk about Frank Clark. He limped off the field on Tuesday. Recurrence of the hamstring. I think he's done in any kind of preseason action. I mean, they're knocking on the door of the next game. On Friday, the third game, who knows how much guys are going to play anyway. So I think he gets shut down and they give him a try, maybe if everything looks good, the week of the first regular season game. First for Jeff, this is kind of one we didn't even discuss this, but it just occurred to me. I'd like to get your opinion on this. They have not made him available for the media. Which it's unique times because there's no open locker room, which there isn't at training camp anyway. But they're not letting you grab guys off the side. It's just the guys they bring to their podium. So the teams are able to structure and limit who they can get. But they made Tyreek Hill available. Now, Tyreek's legal issues that went on 2 years ago with the custody of his son and everything that was happening had been cleared up. And I believe that his son had been brought back into his home. And so in reality, the legal system had played out. That is different than what we're dealing with here with Frank Clark, where the legal system is ongoing. But there are still rules that you're supposed to make everybody available, right? So the Chiefs have not done it. Now, is that to say they didn't want to face the fines of the NFL 2 years ago? They had no real leg to stand on, and now they're willing to just take their lumps, so they figure the COVID cloud that hangs over the league. We can't get the guy over there, and he's been hurt. He's been in treatment, and they've got enough things to do it. Or are they just flat out terrified of what Frank Clark's going to say when he gets in front of us?
I think they're terrified of everything about Frank Clark right now. That situation is amazingly, if this was obviously an offensive player, Travis Kelce would have more legs nationally, but it's certainly, you look at the circumstances surrounding it and the potential for suspension, it's just not good. And you also look at the fact this guy is coming into a year when he has to really step up his game. And you look at the arrest, you look at the injuries so far, and it's just like, how is this going to end up well for him? I just don't know how Frank Clark is going to end up being anything more than just. And I think he was good. in that first year when they won the Super Bowl with him. But this is what happens when you are so desperate to win championships that you invest so much in a guy to get that, and then you're left with what he really is. And, I'm hopeful that they can have a good pass rush. But I think without Frank Clark playing at a high level, I just don't know how good it's going to be. And I think there's a lot of questions about whether Chris Jones can be a dominant player moving up and down the line of scrimmage. I mean, Jaron Reed is a really good pass rusher. But again, I think you need to, within this defense, have somebody who can dominate people. And I just don't know if Frank Clark is ever going to be that kind of person. And I certainly don't even know where his headspace is right now. So to the question you're asking, I just think putting him in front of a microphone right now would be a huge mistake because, I don't think he could say something that would help his cause.
Chris Jones can't be that dominant guy?
I'm not saying he can't. I want to see it. And I like Chris Jones as an interior pass rusher. I like the idea of him moving to the edge every now and then. But it is different when you're going against – people look at his size and say, well, he's going to have an advantage against offensive tackles because he's 6'6", and he's 300-plus pounds. But offensive tackles in this league now are really athletic, are really good at dealing with guys. You're not going to bull rush your way to 15 sacks on the edge. You're going to have an assortment of moves. You're going to have to be a lot more skilled than he's had to be. I think that the advantage he's had playing inside is that he's a better athlete than most people he's playing against. I think you move that to the edge, it becomes a different conversation.
Eric, we talked about in 2019, two fatties in a blitz, right? They had injuries. Chris Jones went down. Frank Clark was battling a neck injury. This is what I think ultimately people ended up settling on was part of his problem. And they were starting Colin Saunders, a trio of Saunders, Noddy, and 64.
Mike Pennell.
Mike Pennell, thank you. And they were rotating those two, and they really weren't able to get pressure off the edges. Alex Okafor, I think, was even down. Agbayani had gone down. And what they started doing was, for the most part, playing kind of straight up. But then when they'd bring a blitz, they'd bring it, and it was really effective. And, they lost some close games, but they were also able to get some pressure. Does that have to be the scheme now, or is the scheme, to Jeff's point, like we don't know what he can be? It's just hold on, hope you can have Frank Clark healthy, get his head right, come through the legal troubles, and sometime in December, to speak to the hot defense theory of 19, Frank Clark gets hot and hits a rhythm, and maybe for 17 games you can't have a good pass rush, but you just want to get to the tournament and then hope Frank Clark's right of mind and right of health, and maybe you can squeeze the best of Frank Clark for one more playoff run before you walk away from the contract.
Yeah, Jeff brought up the Giants, right? And I thought that was great. In fact, I think the 07 Giants get the most love because, they beat Brady in that sort of crazy, that the Super Bowl where they were 17-0. But the 2011 Giants were a team that was 25th in points allowed. And I know that wasn't Spagnuolo, but the seeds of Spagnuolo were there. And they had Pierre-Paul with a bunch of sacks and a bunch of kind of just guys who weren't really anything. But you did have inside-outside players. I think in this league, the Chris Jones, you look at LA, Leonard Floyd's nothing special, but Aaron Donald gets Leonard Floyd multiple sacks. And that's got to be the thought process with, third down, right? Because I think Jones playing on the edge is going to be an early down phenomenon. I think on late downs, you're going to put Tyrann Reed next to him, and they're going to rush from three techniques and bully guards. I think Reed's presence is actually going to be fairly important for the team. Noddy's a great early down player, and Wharton can kind of spell those guys. I think that group's going to be fine. They do, though. And I think for me, if I'm doing this, I say, look, Frank Clark, you are not a starting player in the NFL anymore. You are playing – because I actually looked at the data, and I found that and this might be a motivational issue. This might be – I don't know. I don't know what prior this confirms. But Frank Clark was one of the worst pass rushers in football last year. But he was the worst on early downs, meaning that, on first and second down,
what are you saying, Eric? Don't sugarcoat it. No.
What's that?
I said, what are you saying, man? Don't sugarcoat it. Let us know.
Yeah, but on late downs, he was actually somewhat he was fine. He was a decent pass rusher on third downs. So if you can say, okay, on early downs, it's just going to be Jones, Reed, Wharton, Noddy, and then some schmuck at one of the other end positions. And we're going to figure it out. We're going to hope Chris Jones on early downs can get pressure against tackles. And then on late downs, we're going to put the two fatties in the middle, and we're going to blitz. Like, they could even go a 3-3-5 now that they have some depth at linebacker and just run a blitz through there. But, like, on third down, it's like, look, Frank, you're playing 25 snaps a game, okay? And if you can't get pressure, I talked about those percentages. If you can't get pressure on 5 of them, what are you doing here? And that's kind of, I think, how they have to do it. And that's going to preserve his health. That's going to, all these kinds of things. It'll be the shot in the ass he kind of needs, because he came here to be a Khalil Mack type player. I mean, he's paid almost as much as Khalil Mack is, and he's Lance Johnstone. Like, that's who he is.
So I'm listening to Andy Reid. You mentioned Jarran Reed. He better be good, right? Because Andy Reid doesn't want to hype anybody up, right? He doesn't rip anybody either. But, like, you bring up Chris Jones at defensive end, and I've heard it 3 or 4 times when people bring that up to him, from starting in the offseason to mini camps and now up in St. Joe. And his first reaction is to give you that little look where he looks down and go, I remember we got Jarran Reed on the inside. And that really helps. That allows us to put Chris Jones out there. It's kind of like he's like, hey, remember, everyone, we replaced Chris Jones on the inside. So Chris Jones is like buying us a new left defensive end. I mean, is Reed – because they got pressure on the inside from Jones alongside Noddy, alongside the other defensive tackles. And I'm with you. I do think there's going to be a lot of those two guys on the inside. They're going to expect to collapse the pocket and say, we're going to flush the quarterback into our average defensive ends because we're going to collapse the pocket on the inside. And I think that's probably their best strategy, right? I'm with you. The early down phenomenon of Chris Jones makes sense to me. But is Jarran Reed – according to your grades, the PFF grades – he's fine, but Andy Reid's talking like, they just added Chris Jones the second on the inside. I mean, what is Jarran Reed here for all the excitement that Andy Reid, or all the attention Andy Reid is at least directing his way?
Well, don't you think, though, I don't want to interrupt, Jeff, but, like, don't you think that, like, this is the Belichickian aspect of what they're trying to do, right? Like, in the early 2000s, it was everybody's running a 4-3, and the John Randall type 3 technique is just too freaking expensive. So I'm going to buy the Ted Washington fat ass nose tackle that no one wants. And I'm going to have the 1-3-4 in the NFL. And the Chiefs are just responding. And I don't know if this is on purpose, but I would like to think it is, which is, look, edge players are expensive in the NFL. They cost a lot of money, or they cost huge draft picks. And we're 12-4 or better every single year. We're never going to be able to pick the Chase Youngs out of the litter, right? So we have to somehow figure out how to game the system, and gaming the system is saying, and the Vikings did this with John Randall too, and it's like, and the Rams are doing it somewhat with Donald. He moves, and you even look, and we talk about this as a tough move. It's not unprecedented, and I don't mean to compare J.J. Watt to Chris Jones, but they're relatively close in production. J.J. Watt is an edge player now. All right. Early on in his career, he was an interior player, and he has drifted. If you look at his, he's drifted from the 3 tech to the 5 tech to now he's a 7 tech, all throughout his career. It's not unprecedented for these great, strong, mature, interior players to move out to the edge. And I think it's because what ends up happening when you pay those guys a lot of money, it's the best bang for your buck there. As far as Reed's concerned, look, he's been involved in 11 sacks 2 of the last 3 years. He doesn't get good grades from us, and I have to wonder why, because it's not like he's being helped out a ton in Seattle. Like, it's not like he's the cleanup guy for Aaron Donald, the cleanup guy for Frank Clark. Like, he's being productive, but he isn't like winning as much as his statistics are concerned. The Chiefs' hope has got to be playing next to Chris Jones means he doesn't have to win to accumulate the pressures, a la somebody like Leonard Floyd with Aaron Donald.
Yeah, it's interesting because he's another guy that, coming out of that Seattle system, it's hard to figure him out, because at the start of his career, he was a run defender, a dominant run guy. And in the last couple of years, he's become a pass rusher. And I'm sure Eric can speak to this, but it's like, Sometimes people put too much emphasis on sacks and not enough on how consistently someone pressures the quarterback. And I haven't studied Jarran Reed enough to know what that is, but it seems to me that the Chiefs' whole philosophy right now is almost like a combination approach, that Jarran Reed could help Frank Clark and Chris Jones can help Jarran Reed. If all these guys are together, that by symbiosis, it's all going to end up working out. And sometimes, not to go back to Frank Clark for too long here, but sometimes in that Seattle system, there's so much that coverage they play on the back end, a lot of zone coverage. You're able to force quarterbacks to hold the ball longer. There's things that help pass rushers out. Obviously, the stadium is very noisy. I don't know how much his sack total comes from being in front of that crowd versus on the road. But it does feel like if this is going to work with the Chiefs pass rush, and I think that's the big element for me for this defense working, is still being able to get the pass rush no matter who they got in the secondary, how much depth they have at corner now. These guys up front have to get it done. It's going to be as a unit, not just one guy in particular taking over games.
From a GM standpoint, I mean, Eric, and you've made this point a couple of times here, and I think it's a good one. When you are as good as the Chiefs are, number one, you have good players, so you're paying them, so you usually don't have a lot of money to go splash around in free agency, which has been the reality for the last couple of years of the Chiefs, right? I mean, even Reed, who they're talking a lot about, so 1 year, I think $7 million deal, right? That's not a big contract that's out there. But even more so, you're not getting high draft picks, which is where high-end edge rushers are. Listen, every battle plan has casualties, right? No combat plan is we go in there and we take on no injuries. No one gets shot. No one gets wounded. No planes get shot down. Like every battle has had casualties. I think it's the same way with every salary cap. No salary cap is getting 100% return or 150% return off 100% investment. But the Frank Clark pick is kind of blowing this thing up because that was their big move to get that high-end edge rusher, and he hasn't been that guy. And so and we know that. I'm not splitting it at him there, discovering new ground. I want to take it to the Tyrann Mathieu cap hit. Jamal Adams signed 4 years, $70 million, so $17.5 million, $20 million signing bonus, $38 million guaranteed. Tyrann Mathieu's deal is in the background. Everyone's worried about it because he's such a popular player, and it does suck. And we talked about this with Chris Jones' deal a year and a half ago, that like nobody wants to let go of Chris Jones, but at some point you got to walk on some deals, and some of them got to hurt. Otherwise, you're going to end up burying yourself. Now, I've seen estimates on where the cap's going to go when the new TV contracts come in, and I know the Chiefs are banking on that, right? Part of what they've done is banking on them when it goes up. But when everybody else is splashing cash around and the cost of everybody goes up, including quarterbacks, and maybe your quarterback comes to you and goes, okay, we're a little early, but it's time to renegotiate that deal. You know, what you think is going to be a lot of money may not. Is investing in a guy for ages 31, 31, 32 plus in Tyrann Mathieu, as much as he means to this defense. Like I keep hearing the intangibles, and the intangibles are great, but isn't part of the Chiefs' job to develop other guys that are leaders and have intangibles to be able to lead this defense? Or, you know, are they actually going to be able to re-sign every guy? This is the first time they're headed into their 30s with a guy. They're going to be signing a guy that the new money is all in his 30s. And those are the things that destroyed the Chiefs towards the second half of Carl Peterson's career.
It also, by the way, like there's another safety that's on the, like Justin Simmons, obviously he's on the franchise tag, but Harrison Smith might also come up with Minnesota soon. Like this might be really expensive for the Chiefs. And you're right, man. Like you look at, and it's why I think the Ravens are the model franchise as far as how to run a team, and Cleveland's on the way, but nothing Cleveland has done is hurt yet, right? They've never looked at a player who's good and said, you know what, you are good, but it's just not going to, like, I mean, the Ravens moved on from Mosley, right? They moved on from Judon. They moved on from Orlando Brown. They've moved on from some
Darius Smith.
Yeah, none of these players suck, right? None of these players suck. And they moved on, and there's nothing hidden. There's nothing wrong about them. It's just that it is not, you can't pay everybody. And the hard part, and I think the silver bullet here, and this is where I will give Veach some crap. You just have to evaluate the thing better, right? When you look at Frank Clark's pressure totals, you realize that 20% of them came against Colton Miller 1 year in London. as a member of the Seahawks, and you're like, and like that's edge, as tough as it is because edge is so highly paid. Edge is a position that's easy to evaluate. Can the guy get pressure? There's not a scheme fit for an edge, right? An edge just goes after the passer. So like Chris Jones is one thing, and you and I were like, hey, look, if we had to choose between Jones and Clark, we'd all choose Jones. He's a better football player, but you already chose Clark, so you have to make sacrifices somewhere. I think between Mathieu, Jones, and Clark, it would be a tough call for me to pick Mathieu or Jones. But you've already you have to be stern in certain situations, and you have to evaluate the players better. You can't go in on Frank Clark if Frank Clark's not worth it. And I know we're allowing folks mistakes, but that was a big one, and that's one that ultimately they're going to have to pay for.
Eric referenced the Belichickian way a little bit ago, and this is very much a Belichickian type situation with Tyrann Mathieu in that. I think we all remember when he cut Lawyer Malloy, a year after the Super Bowl or 2 years after the Super Bowl. He was the heart of that team. He's what Tyrann Mathieu is to this team now. And it was so discouraging and deflating for that team that a lot of people thought, okay, how are they ever going to go forward? They got killed by Buffalo that year, the season opener, 31-0. You know what happened into that year? They won the Super Bowl. And they got Rodney Harrison and they moved forward. And Belichick saw something in Rodney Harrison. He was like, hey, you know what? This guy's cheaper. Lawyer's a great player. He's been the heart of this team, but I got a better deal here. And I think that's the kind of tough call the Chiefs have to make at some point about Tyrann Mathieu. I love him as a player. And I think that he certainly has tremendous value in what he gave this team in 2019 when he showed up. Yeah. But at the end of the day, you can't be signing players based on what they've done. Or sentimental reasons.
And I love the reference on Lawyer Malloy because I got a chance to actually interview him. Was it that year or was it his Buffalo? I think maybe a couple of years. It was a year or two before that cut. Yeah. The Patriots and my old job, Sports Fan Radio Network, we had a deal. I can't remember. We called it the NFL Player Network or something. And so guys that maybe wanted to get into broadcasting were coming on with us. And Lawyer Malloy was a guy I got to talk to. I think it was every other week and loved it. And you could just tell he was a guy that he would go butt heads with Godzilla. It did not matter. He was an absolute warrior. And even, and Mathieu has great leadership skills, almost more of this guy's going to, he's the general that's going to conquer the world. Everyone knows wisdom comes out of his mouth. Lawyer Malloy was just all right, when we kick down the door, guys, Lawyer's going in first. And then we come in behind him and everybody knows their role. He was just, you could hear that in his voice and the way he talked. And I think it's a great point. And the Patriots were able to overcome it. Did they have Rodney Hudson in the fold? Or Rodney Harrison in the fold? Or did they cut him and then sign him right away? There was no 1 year without him, right? One came right in after
Malloy was cut. Malloy was cut in preseason, right?
Yeah.
So the 03 Patriots.
Harrison came the next year, didn't he?
Yeah, Harrison was 04 because I remember his first year was the year where he picked off Roethlisberger in the title game.
Yep.
Okay.
Harrison played for the Pats in 03 as well. Okay. So you're right. So they were backfilling.
They had the replacement.
You're right. Yep.
And so
I misspoke there. Yep.
To me, are they in this negotiation with Tyrann Mathieu, whom we all love? I mean, I really do. He is as good a guy. I get the same sense back when they didn't make him, hey, he's only available when we put him up on a podium. When you could actually go talk to him in his locker, I thought he was phenomenal. And you really got to see even more who the guy was in those times, the little window we got in that first year with him. But he's 29. He's got 2 surgically repaired knees. I asked him, does he ever think about getting out there and returning kicks? And he's like, not with my knees today. I mean, talk about self-aware. I mean, there have been a couple of self-aware statements by the Chiefs. Orlando Brown going, I'm not very athletic. And then, Tyrann Mathieu being like, nah, not with my knees the way they are today. And you mentioned $17.5 million plus other safeties that are going to get paid that could drive this price up. I think there's no way Bill Belichick would be entertaining the idea. He'd be like, we're going to play this last year with you, man. We're going to win a Super Bowl. I'm going to give you a hug and you go get as much as you can. We're going to have a number for you at that time. And if that's the best deal, great, come on back. If it's not, I'm going to slap you on the back, and we're going to sit out on my boat one day when we're done with this, and we're going to talk about the great championships that we won. There is no way Bill Belichick would be doing this deal, is there? And I know that sucks, and fans are going to get pissed at me because that's not what they want to hear. They want you to blow smoke up their ass and tell them every guy you like is going to play great till he's 40.
Cap is fake. Everybody wants to hear the cap is fake and all this stuff, but like, and Belichick has relented a few times, right? Like last season with Gilmore, right? He gave Gilmore some more. But for the most part, even Brady, right? Even Brady, and I know you'll come back and say like, well, it was actually this, that, and the other thing. But like Brady never screwed them financially, right? He would never like, it wasn't like necessarily cheap, but it wasn't, it was never prohibitive, right? Like they never could.
It was to Bob Kraft's credit, he was writing a lot of those 40 million signing bonus checks, which everybody acts like, and we've talked about it, like, especially coming off COVID, real cash dollars are an issue for teams right now, and maybe even for the Chiefs right now, with all the cash that they laid out on those other contracts and the revenues being down. Bob Kraft they were always tearing up that deal 2 or 3 years in. Kraft writing a new signing bonus check, which they could then, lay out over it, and they would redo it whenever they had that pocket in the cap where it's like, okay, we got some room. Let's tear up Tom. Let's give him a fat check. He's happy because the real money he's getting was always the same as Peyton Manning, but they were able to keep that cap number down. I mean, so there was
that is a commitment by the owner, and that is something like, I got specific answers when I said, hey, why aren't you signing Melvin Ingram? Hey, why aren't you offering more for Juju? And it's like, our cap situation might be okay, but our cash situation, the amount of money that the Hunts have to put into escrow every single time you convert a base salary into a signing bonus or whatever, that is not trivial. And the Chiefs got screwed, right? They win a Super Bowl in 19, and 2020, where you have local revenues, are the revenues you get all to yourself. And, tickets like, jersey sales and all that kind of stuff that would have happened at Arrowhead Stadium at 60, 70,000 fans a pop were happening at what? 10,000 fans a pop, if that. And so they especially were hit hard because this was a year they were going to, now it's not going to be that bad, right? People are not leaving the Chiefs because they lost to Tampa Bay, but it was a situation where like, it's not trivial for the Hunts just to do all this maneuvering, right? And at some point they're not like, they're riding high now, and they should be. They'll probably will be for a decade on this team, but like there will come a day where it's like, look, man, like, we pushed the 20 forward with Chris Jones. We did that with Kelsey. Mahomes is, the Mahomes thing too. Like it helped with the cap, but Mahomes got a ton of money, just like, and that stuff's not trivial. And it's not as easy as saying, look, they got space underneath the cap. They have real financial, considerations.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I remember when I first started covering the NFL, I covered the Oakland Raiders, and people explain to me the difference between the mom and pop shops in the NFL and the ones that are funded by big corporations or in markets like Dallas, where people who have made their money doing something else. But as a family-run business, those expenses become real things. You have to really seriously think about what you're paying somebody. To bring it back to Tyrann Mathieu, the value he brought to the Chiefs when he showed up is bringing some maturity, some leadership, some calm, and some resolve to that defense. The question that you have to ask is, do they have enough around that defense now to say, well, do we really have to pay for this, a premium for this? That's what you're paying for, right? You're paying for Tyrann Mathieu to continue being that guy. But if you have enough depth around you, you have more guys who can play in the slot. You have more guys who have grown up in the system. Does his value still mean he has to be the highest paid safety in the NFL? And the question he has to ask himself is, does he have to be the highest paid safety in the NFL? Is he willing to do what Mahomes did and take a discount to continue to be a part of this team? Because that's the only way it really works. If it's all about him saying, I'm better than Jamal Adams, I'm better than this person, I need $18 million a year to feel validated in what I've done here, then if you're Brett Veach, you have to think long and hard about what you're doing, keeping him around in his early 30s.
Go ahead.
I ask a question here, like, let's say this gets to next year. Are you paying Trevorius Ward or are you paying Tyrann Mathieu? Because I think Ward's a good player. He's obviously younger, probably not going to be quite as expensive. not as good, certainly, but probably plays a more premium position as far as the league is concerned, and a position that's hard to replace. But like, these are questions that they have to think about, right? Because if you, and I guess we say this all the time and they find a way, but at some point, if you go with Mathieu right now, your chances of signing Orlando Brown decrease. Your chances of signing Trevarius Ward decrease. Your chances of extending Derek Nottie. Derek Nottie is a really good football player who people in that building like, right? Like there are people in that building that think Derek Nottie is a first-round talent when he came out of Florida State. Like you, and those decisions are one more thing. Oh, of course they'll let Nottie go. Who, it's like, no, like this is a sentimental group, right? And like at some point you can pile up sentimental deals if you let one keynote guy leave, but you can't do it all. And well, I think, I think that it's a really interesting topic. I look forward to, what ends up happening.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this too, because again, I keep having this caveat of I love Tyrann Mathieu, but Tyrann Mathieu, his success has a lot to do with just his versatility, the things that he can do, coverage, blitzing, all that stuff. But, Eric asked that question about Trevarius Ward. Would you take Justin Simmons right now over Tyrann Mathieu? Would you take Antoine Winfield Jr.? Those guys can be found. Sometimes we talk ourselves into thinking we can't find another guy like him, but you can find those guys.
And that's the transition I've been, I think it's good stuff. We've hit on so many other things, but does this all come down to the fact that Juan Thornhill is running with the twos, and some people think charitably with the twos? You invest a second-round pick on a safety. You just mentioned Antoine Winfield was a second-round pick. Where did Simmons go? I'm trying to remember where Justin Simmons went in the draft. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So, I mean, there are good safeties available in rounds that the Chiefs have had picks. They took Juan Thornhill, and he was first-team all-rookie defense, right, in his first year. It looked like he was well on his way. And I keep hearing people, and Eric and I talked about this the other day on the radio show, that, his knee. Is he confident in the knee? He's got to get confident in the knee. Man, there has never been – they need to find a doctor that can, either a head shrink, that can, build some confidence, or they got to start doing a better job on these reconstructions, because whether it was Tom O'Lee, Justin Houston, Jamal Charles, they have all these guys that –
Eric Berry.
Adrian Peterson comes back in like 9 months and rushes for 2,000 yards. The Chiefs need like 3 years to get a guy back to 100% from knee injury. And if that's what it is, I think some of it's schematic. I don't know that he knows where he's supposed to be. I mean, he got beat on an out route that seemed like he went and doubled the same guy that Tyrann Mathieu was already covering today at practice. And that's against an offense that he kind of knows what they're going to do. So, I'm really scratching my head. And I think if Juan Thornhill had built on that first year, at least the reputation of his first year in earning those votes, if he truly was one of the 2 best rookie safeties in football, then I don't know that they're even beginning to have this conversation with Tyrann Mathieu. Like, right, we can talk about all the intangibles, but if Thornhill was ready to be that kind of player, then I think, and maybe they would, maybe that's the key to Spagnuolo's coverage is the safety position. But I don't think that can be minimized, that they're sitting here going, what are we going to do? Dan Sorensen's not getting any younger or more athletic. Devin Key, I think he was probably on their board as a 5th or 6th rounder, and they were thrilled to get him. But again, not 2nd or 3rd rounder. Like, who are they turning it over to? If they could turn it over to Thornhill, I think the conversation about a Mathieu extension would be very different.
Well, you expect a guy who's taken in the 2nd round to be a start, like not only to be a starter right away, but to be a difference maker on your team, especially at a non-premium position, right? Like if you take a guard, a safety, a linebacker, a center, those types of positions in round 2 is a high pick for a safety, right? Like there were no 1st-round picks this year at the position, right? So it just tells you about sort of like what the league views the value of the position at. Now, I know Mathieu plays a lot of different positions, and hence the league values him, I think, more like differently, right? Whereas Simmons and Jesse Bates and those guys are more kind of like one-trick ponies at safety that are really good at those. Matthew's maybe a little different. Harrison Smith, Jamal Adams, kind of in that range as well. But that's the thing. Like to mix and match there. I mean, Anthony Harris was a very good safety for Minnesota, graded in the 90s for us for 2 straight years. And Philadelphia got him for 1 year, $5 million a year after he was the Vikings franchise tag player, right? Like, it doesn't take a lot to sign safeties. It's just that when they bungled the position so badly with Barry and then Ron Parker and then Eric Murray and like those guys, where it was like they went straight to Mathieu, which I can understand. It's just that maybe they should sort of throttle back a little bit and say, okay, in the future now we're going to view the position as it is and trust in our coordinator, who might end up being their head coach, by the way, someday. Trust in our coordinator to sort of make it work and not have to need elite talent at every single level of the defense, like, because that's what he's being paid for.
All right, I want to switch gears over to the offensive side of the ball. Clyde Edwards-Helaire looked good early on with the first unit out there. There's been a lot of talk about he's going to be a lot more effective in the passing game. I saw him just absolutely whiff on a pass protection, which I think is a lot of why he didn't have. Again, I've been up there 3 days because we can only have one guy up there, so I haven't seen as much camp. And so, guy looks great one day and somebody else looks like crap. I'm here to tell you, like, I haven't seen enough quantity of plays to judge it, but I did see him whiff pretty bad on one of the backup linebackers in a pass protection that was out there. How good is he going to be this year? Like, what is the feeling, Jeff, you have of what Clyde Edwards-Helaire will be? And will he ever, justify to analytics nerds like Eric going number 32 overall?
It's a great question, and I don't have a great answer. My sense is that they will never fall in love with running the football to validate taking him in the first round.
Could he catch 700 yards and 8 touchdowns out of the backfield to supplement it, though?
I don't even know if they'll do it. If they do, it would be surprising to me, just because of the way the quarterback is wired, the way the offense rolls. I mean, so much when you really are trying to throw the football down the field as much as Mahomes wants to, when you have Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. I just think it's just to expect him to get 700 yards out of the backfield as a receiver is a lot. And so, look, I look at Andy and Veach. Like, once they got that championship, they had carte blanche to do whatever they wanted to do. And this whole idea that they're getting Brian Westbrook, well, when Andy had Brian Westbrook in Philadelphia, he had other backs that worked alongside him. He had a trio of backs, and he ran a different style of offense. And so it was easy to say, oh, we can do all these different things with him. I think when you have the collection of talent he has here, it's just it's a conundrum, because ideally, first round pick on a back like that, you want to see him get 1,200 yards and catch 60 passes. You want to be Dalvin Cook, but he can't be Dalvin Cook in this offense. And so I think he's a good player. I think I'd like to see him be better in short yardage. I think he's too small for the position, to be honest with you. And so if they're going to divvy up the carries and give Darrell Williams run and Jerick McKinnon run, it's just, I don't see where there's going to have to be enough opportunities for him to touch the football to have the kind of numbers you're talking about.
Eric, do you see it?
I don't. Because for me, it's also, he got injured last year. And so, in games at the end of the season where it would have been nice to have him kind of grind out games, he wasn't there, right? And in a playoff game against Cleveland where, I think we're all happy. Like, the Browns win was one of my favorite as a Chiefs fan, just because it was like almost snatched from us, and Henny was awesome. God, it would have been nice to have a running back in that game that could really just take and I know Darryl played pretty well, but it'd be nice to have a back that the other team was scared of, right? And take some pressure off of Henny and so on. And like, the problem is those guys are they're just so random, right? Like, I think the best running back in football was a 3rd round pick by New Orleans a couple years ago. And McCaffrey's awesome, but then he misses the whole year last year. Zeke was tremendous as a rookie in Dallas, and he's literally gone net, every single year had his yards per touch go down. The position is just really tough. And I found the way that Andy approached the position extremely refreshing for a long time, where you ride the hot hand when Darrell Williams, Damian Williams is hot. You put him in there and he's amazing. And no one remembers that he was an also ran in Miami. When Darrell Williams is hot, you roll with him. When LaShawn McCoy, until his wheels fall off, go with him, et cetera, et cetera. The problem, I think, with Clyde Edwards-Helaire is the draft pick is going to lead them to do things to justify his existence. And it's going to lead them to maybe put him in positions that he's not all that great at, like Jeff said, which is short yardage, right? Like they're going to want to get the guy some touchdowns, because if the guy goes through his whole rookie deal with like 7 touchdowns, it's going to look like the worst draft pick of all time. But he's not a great goal line runner. And that would be fine if he was a 3rd-round pick, because you just mix and match all the guys. So it's just tough. And it's, again, I think he's a good football player. I don't think he's good. He was good enough to be the 32nd pick. And I hope the Chiefs just view it as a sunk cost and treat their running back room like they normally do, and have him just be the best of the group, but not force anything to him.
It is a sunk cost, and I think that's something everybody, they all talk about, like, once the draft's over, we're out here. It's all a competition and everything. And then all the guys they pick keep getting rep after rep after rep. And, it's easier said than done, right? They talk it out of both sides of their mouth. To your point, I want to go back to 2 things. One, he struggled in the short yardage. Like, they struggled in the red zone. Did they struggle in the red zone because he couldn't run it? Or are we going to turn around and we're going to look? And because, like, nobody thought Jamal Charles, like, Todd Haley took Jamal Charles off the field to hand the ball to Thomas Jones, right, at the goal line, and have him slam into the goal with his 3.1 yards per carry, even though Jamal Charles was averaging over 5. Barry Sanders was taken off the field.
Tommy Vardell.
Similar sized back, and kind of a similar, kind of jump start, scat back. And the idea was you got to push the pile, not find a hole. Never mind, I never really saw Marcus Allen push the pile, and he was one of the great, I think, finished as the leading touchdowns on the ground when he walked away from the game. Emmitt Smith would break it, and others have since too. But he didn't do it that way. So I think there are other ways to do it. Did they struggle in the red zone because he couldn't do it, or did the offensive line screw him so that they couldn't run? They couldn't get any push, and all of a sudden we're going to look up and be like, "Wow, Tyrann Mathieu had 14 rushing touchdowns. Like, where did that come from?" And whether there's 7 of them come at distance, but now there's a push up front, and he gets low and gets lost, finds the little mouse hole and leans across the goal line, and then that threat of the run has 7-8 in the box, and Mahomes throws for 45 touchdowns, and everyone's going to go, well, yeah, he was better because look, Mahomes threw for 45 touchdowns. They're just better in the red zone, so he was a benefit of it. When in reality, the problem all along was the offensive line.
But go ahead, Eric. Isn't that like the point of not taking a running back so high, because that guy can't?
Okay, so great point. So let me give you the second one, and then because I know Jeff wants to jump in too, but let me give the second point. I remember talking to Bill Kuharich, right? A longtime personnel guy in the NFL, general manager of the Saints, the director of player personnel for the Chiefs, which was really like being the general manager for the Chiefs, because Peterson was very much more like the Theo Epstein president of the Cubs. People did the underling thing, and then he'd make the final call, right? And Bill Kuharich did that. In fact, he did it for the 2008 draft. That's what was that, the Glenn Dorsey and Brandon Albert and Brandon Flowers and Brandon Carr and Jamal Charles.
Jared Allen year. Yeah,
he that was his draft, right? And he put that together. And I remember sitting in his office and I'd talk about different things. And one of the things he said, I don't know if it was with Chris Nioli, when they took Chris Nioli with the Saints, or it was some other stop he had, and they had taken a guard early. And they didn't want to take the guard that early. They wanted to trade back. And this is why I think this is what happened to the Chiefs. They wanted to trade back. They couldn't get back. And they're like, we cannot take a guard this early. And maybe it's what he thinks they should have done. Maybe it was somebody else. They took something else and it blew up in their face. He's like, listen, we should have taken this guy. Like, the position, it was a guard. So I don't know. I look back and Nioli they took high with the Saints, but I can't remember if it's him. So don't hold. But I remember Bill saying this to me. He's like, listen, sometimes you're just stuck where you're stuck. Like, everybody can talk about trade up, trade down. Sometimes you can't. And then what are you going to do? Are you going to take a guy that everybody else says you should take, or are you going to take the guy that you're committed to, right? Like, know his position on the field doesn't say he should go this high. But you're talking about a guy, all right, we're going to look over here and we're going to take the 7th corner on our board, or are we going to take the number 1 guard? Are we going to take the 3rd linebacker, or are we going to take the number 1 running back? And I think we'll always debate, and rightfully so, whether or not he's worth the 32nd pick. And I think of his draft class, that'll be significant, and it will always be a part of the Brett Veach draft and be factored into that. But I think, and this is the beautiful thing about analytics. It's in this vacuum, right? It's not in the 7 minutes on the clock. Jackasses, we got to go with somebody. So who's going to stand up and tell me we're taking the 4th safety on our board over the number one running back? Who's going to stand up and tell me we're taking the sixth offensive tackle over the number one running back on our board? There's a lot more, there's a lot more that goes into the situation, the dynamics that put you in that spot. So yes, I think the offensive line will be better, but it'll be better for Patrick Mahomes and him. And if he shines behind a better offensive line, like, does it matter that you overpaid off a in a vacuum price for the guy?
Eric, in the vacuum, the man living in the.
Well, we always have this debate about analytics and about it's all great, but at some point, some a-hole's got to make a choice.
Well, I think that the margins are thin, right, Soren? So, like, the wrong, in my opinion, the wrong decision is not going to always result in a bad outcome, right? Like, if I punt the ball on 4th and 1 from my opponent's 41 and the guy muffs it and I recover it at the 8-yard line, like, that's a good outcome, and I still should have gone for it, right? Like, so that's the thing. Like, with Edwards-Helaire, I'm not saying at 32 he's the worst pick that they could ever imagine having, and there's no path to success. To me, it's just like when I'm using the 32nd pick and I'm a team that, like, is up against it cap wise, right? And is consistently, because, like, here's the issue, right? Like, all the stuff you described, right, to make Clyde Edwards-Helaire better. And I think the Chiefs did a lot of those things this offseason, by the way. Costs a ton.
Not just to make Edwards-Helaire better.
For sure. But to make Clyde Edwards-Helaire, to make the Clyde Edwards-Helaire pick worth it, you're talking about trading draft capital for Orlando Brown, the most expensive contract for a guard, a second-round pick on a center, and, now Trey Smith's going to be found money, I think. But then, and again, and Lucas Niang, who was a third-round pick. So basically, it's not just the 32nd pick to support that player, right? Whereas when you take players at premium positions, they pay back, right? Like, if I take, obviously Mahomes is clear as day, but if I take like Mathieu, the reason we're talking about Mathieu the way that we are is you're not paying for one player. You're paying for him, and you're paying for the effect that he has on Daniel Sorensen and on Travarius Ward and so on and so forth. And that, as much as that is expensive, I think you are getting positive externalities with it. Whereas with running back, and again, the pick is there. I'm rooting for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He's on the team. Like, I'm happy if they make it work with him, and they should, because, like you said, the hay is in the barn at this point. But picks like that require more than just the investment, because positions like that require a lot of extra things to go well for it to be successful.
This is why Eric is only known by one name, Soren, and you and I have to have our last names down here. He's like Beyonce or or Prince. Just one name, and you get the brilliance of that. I don't know why your last name isn't on here right now. I guess why.
Sorry.
But you make a great point, because I was about to say the impact that Clyde Edwards-Helaire can have on this offense is not that it was already a great offense when he showed up. So for it to become that much greater is pretty unrealistic. And I would say that, Soren, you talk about the offensive line, things they have to do to get to help him get better. When Kareem Hunt was running the football, these weren't questions that were being asked. And I can watch Kareem Hunt now running the football and say, okay, he's a better running back than Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And the value you get from having cheaper options in the backfield is important because of the ability to go out and invest in other positions. This offense was fine when Darrell Williams was running the football. It was fine. And so I don't know it's going to be that much better with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, whatever he does here. And I agree, Eric. I like the kid. I hope he does well. It's not his fault that he's where he's at. But this was a pick made more out of hubris and more out of just the afterglow of the Super Bowl. Like, they could do whatever they wanted when they took him.
There was a little bit of Trung candidate by the Rams.
Yeah. That's a great pull. That's a great pull.
I mean, there was kind of like, these other spots matter. Like, it's not just toys out there, on a, I get it, but if you're to play it back, and maybe we'll wrap with this, because like there were good people in that room that wanted Willie Gay Jr. in the first round,
yes.
right? Like we touched on that. So if they'd popped at Willie Gay Jr. at 32, where do you get the running back along the way? Right? Armed with the hindsight of a season under it. And I'm sure you're looking at the draft like I am right now, Eric. I mean, like, you're not picking those 63. I know you're not going to vote. Let's use more draft capital to move higher up in the second round. And let's go get, like, DeAndre Swift went at 35. He hasn't been anything. Jonathan Taylor at 41. Right? Like those are spots. And assuming they couldn't trade down, which is what I believe was the case.
Where'd James Robinson go?
Who?
James Robinson from Jacksonville.
See, I like Jeff. Jeff's on my side here. He's the 100th best player in football, and he's freely available after the draft.
No, I'm on your side as well.
No, I agree with you. What you're saying is there are realities that the Chiefs face, and on that night, like I had this entire discussion on my podcast, PFF Forecast, where I was on the side of the Browns in the Nick Chubb discussion, where it's like running backs almost never give you value for their second deal. But there is a little bit you sleep 8 hours a day so you can have 16 hours being awake and rested, right? Like those 8 hours aren't always the most productive or positive EV, but you pay, and if that pick was something that somebody in that room really wanted, it might not even, there's sometimes there are battles that you just don't want to fight, right? And if it took everything in Brett Veach's power to get a trade down, and it was a bad value, and somebody in that room wanted Edwards-Helaire and all this kind of stuff, like, again, far be it from me to say, look, it was the worst decision ever and you should never do that, because like there are realities that these guys face. But I will say the alternative, and I know this is somewhat hindsight looking, but the Chiefs this offseason tried their darnest to be better in the red zone. You look at their playmakers. Tyreek Hill is a small wide receiver who plays big, but is still small. Their tight end is the Hall of Fame tight end, in my opinion, but he is not a big guy fade guy. He's not a jump over a defensive back guy. He is a separating guy, which is harder to do in the red zone. Their running back is small. And who did they go after? They went after Juju Smith-Schuster, who's a big physical wide receiver. They went after Josh Reynolds, who's not quite that big and physical, but has a bigger body. And and when you look at the draft now, it might not work, but they've got with Cornell Powell and Noah Gray, big bodies in the red zone. If they were a year ahead of this realization, right? You look at the picks directly after Edwards-Helaire, and you're looking at T. Higgins, who's a big wide receiver. You're looking at Michael Pittman, who's also a big wide receiver. To me, Laviska Shenault also, he's a smaller guy, but he's a good physical player. Cole Kmet, again, they've never been able to solve that second tight end position. To me, and again, none of us had this as a first guess last year. So I'm not going to ding them. I'm just saying in hindsight, that's probably where I would have looked, and knowing that, look, the one place where they were not necessarily fundamentally, and that was what Damian Williams was so good at, was a nose for the red zone. He was good at that. Not necessarily, sort of seeing ahead of time that they would fundamentally struggle as a red zone team. That's the one place where I'm thinking, God, it'd be nice to have T. Higgins on this team right now. That's kind of where but again, I did not have that as a first guess. I did not come into your show the day of the draft and say, I wish they would have gotten T. Higgins. Again, this was something after seeing it play out and be like, oh, yeah, they are a team that struggles in the red zone because of the types of players that are amazing between the 20s on their team, and I think they identify it now. It's probably a year later than they would have liked to.
As they go forward, I would imagine they'd be better served to see themselves the way the Colts saw themselves with Peyton Manning throughout the 2000s. Like after Edgerrin James came and went, they said, we're not going to pay you a bunch of money. You go to Arizona, get paid. You can't name any. Joseph Adai is probably the most prominent running back that point. What's that?
Dominic Rhodes.
Yeah, but they knew we need Peyton Manning to have receivers to the football too. So we're going to invest in tight ends, receivers. We'll get him Brandon Stokely. We're going to get him guys. So that's what they do. The Chiefs are always going to be a predominantly passing offense with Patrick Mahomes running this. So whoever the running back is, it's not really going to matter.
But maybe that was the plan. That it's a first-round pick, but it was. We would agree at pick number 32. If he delivers the goods, and with the best offensive line in college football, he averaged almost 7 yards a carry. If this offensive line, and I think running-wise they're going to be better, I think he's going to average, in 17-game season, he plays all the games, which is always a question mark with any running backs, and is part of what you're factoring into it. But I think the kid's going to hang 1,200 plus, right? I think he's going to get 10 touchdowns on the ground because I think they are going to be better in the red zone. I remember him at LSU, and I think he can be a mini beast at the goal line. I think he does run through one guy. No, he's too small to run through three guys, but Anthony Sherman can't move anybody 6 inches when they hand him the ball on 3rd and 1 either behind a crappy offensive line. So it's not just about your size. I think he will jump, step, hop, and get his way to 10 plus touchdowns. So when I said how good's he going to be, I'm going to take. I'll go 1,600 plus yards overall total. 1,200 rush, 400 plus receiving with an upside of like 600 receiving. I think he is, if he can block anybody, I think he's a bitch coming out of the backfield. When I watch the linebackers have to square up on the release on him, and he gives him one leg, the other, and he's open by like 3 yards. And I had one scout tell me, hey, Christian McCaffrey-esque. I said, you're telling me this is McCaffrey out of the backfield? They said, no. But he's the highest graded receiver we had on the board since Christian McCaffrey as a running back. We didn't see that at all. Now, maybe that guy's a fool, right? Like maybe it's like that team is, their evaluation is like off. But that's what one person said. So I'm going to go with that and say he's going to get more in the passing game. They're going to get more on the ground. I think he is still going to be part of a committee, like you mentioned, the Westbrook days, Jeff, in Philadelphia. But I think you're going to see him be a lot better. And I think the idea was, it's not where we want to go necessarily, but we get him. The pick number 32 is still not that expensive if he is a frontline starting running back, and we've still got money to go elsewhere as opposed to going out and trying to get a guy at $4 or $5 million. They did cut Damian Williams. I mean, their running backs, Jerick McKinnon and Darrell Williams, are costing nothing. And even at pick number 30, even as a first-round pick at 32, he's not real expensive. In fact, the running back position this year, let me look it up for this team. Running backs, they have $6.9 million invested, 3.7% of the cap. It ranks 24th in the NFL.
The expensive part of Edwards-Helaire will be that if he plays well, they will pay him a second contract. That because Nick Chubb, all that, like that. To me, that's
they'll trade him. I think that spot they'll trade.
Okay, and again, like I think it's the same thing with like Quentin Nelson at guard, right? Where you draft him at 6, and it's like, if he plays up to expectation, he's a $20 million guard. And that's like the trap that you fall in with non-premium positions when you draft them high is GMs like to hold them up as trophies. Like, hey, I drafted so-and-so. He was great. Here's his new contract. And look at me. Look at how good I was at evaluating talent. That's part of the trap. I agree. Like right now, especially given how pragmatic Reed is, it's not that big of a deal other than the opportunity cost of the guys that they didn't end up drafting, which at the time we didn't think that they had that many holes. I'll say this, the last thing I'll say about Edwards-Helaire, which I think is, again, me being optimistic. I'm always this way this time of year. That offense last year was out of sorts in a lot of situations. The offensive line wasn't great. I don't think Mahomes played particularly well for him. Like he's amazing, obviously, one of the best players in football, but I thought he was just a tad off. I think when we talk about Edwards-Helaire as a weapon this year, I think if Mahomes is 2% more accurate, which he looked destined to be this offseason because of his focus and stuff, like those arrow routes out of the backfield, they won't be thrown behind him where he can't do anything after. Like I think that this offense will be appreciably better this year. And I think Edwards-Helaire will be a humongous beneficiary of it. And if he is, like, we probably will just be like, oh yeah, it wasn't the greatest pick in the world, but whatever. The guy's got 20 touchdowns. And like, that's I think the rosy way to look at it.
Any final thoughts, Jeff?
I think that's a good way to look at it. It's I think we all realize he has talent and potential, and look, if he could go back and change it now, it'd be great. But ultimately, he has to work, and they're trying to make him work.
All right, just anything real quick. I want to at least mention the game against the 49ers. Anything jump at you that was really super positive, super negative? Any conclusion you take away from that game that stuck with you, Jeff?
I'm loath to draw too many conclusions from preseason games, especially now. There's only 3 of them. I would say that some of the players we've mentioned already, DeAndre Baker being one of them, he stood out for me. Everything we've been hearing in camp is that he hadn't been really impressing. So to play the way he played in those situations, even against a young rookie quarterback and a second-team offense, that he probably stood out for me more than anybody.
All right, Eric.
Yeah, I had the same conclusion that Jeff did. I was happy with Baker. If Baker's a good cornerback, this team really hit on it, because I think Mike Hughes will be a good kick returner and a good third corner. If Baker's a good third corner and fourth corner for them, it's going to be tough for offense. They're going to be a good football team if that's the case. And the second person that I was really impressed with, Deshaun Wharton, had 4 pressures, a sack, 2 stops. I mean, like you said, he's a little undersized. I mean, you're probably not going to start him all 16, 17 games, but as a rotational player, undrafted, if we want to talk about Edwards-Helaire and being like, oh, you dumped a little value there. Well, getting Snead, getting Bo Peep Keys, getting Wharton last year, getting Michael Dana, who's going to start this year over Frank Clark in all probability, hitting on those guys really makes the Edwards-Helaire pick sting a lot less.
I think the Chiefs showed a little more than maybe the 49ers thought they were going to on the pass rush, but I was very happy to see there was a commitment to the pass rush. I think there is some mindset to it, and they got pressure with the 1s out there. They got pressure with the 2s. I think Tim Ward actually looks the part of a Steve Spagnuolo defensive end. I like that they were consistently pressuring the opposition's quarterback, and I think that's going to be – I think that's important. And I think the offensive line showed well the 11 snaps that the frontline guys were in there, and I think they play with more of an attitude. And I do think there's an element of, as long as I'm not convinced that the defensive line has a lot of depth, but I think the iron sharpens iron, which is a phrase everybody loves to throw around these days. I think there's an element of that going on in camp between the offensive line and the defensive line. And I do think that Spagnuolo's ability to scheme the back part, and like you said, some of the depth that's back there, Andy Reid's ability to get guys open. If they're winning in the trenches, the dirty work, I think this team is going to be hell on wheels. And I think we saw a commitment to that. I think that was important. All right, guys, we'll wrap it up. Back at it Thursday with the 2D podcast. We will do that, and look forward to seeing everybody at that point. Thank you for listening to us tonight. For Jeff Chadiha from NFL Network, Eric Eager for Pro Football Focus, Red Petro, thanks for joining us here on Red, White, and True.